We're glad that you're with us right here on Under the Hood with Jonathan Hood. We have a very special guest on the show today. The iconic Scoop Jackson is with me, and we're together, and we've been talking for well over 20 years about basketball and sports and life and culture. But this is something special. We want you to be able to go online while we have this conversation about a new book that's out, Ice, Why I Was Born to Score, the story of George Gervin, Scoop Jackson, a big part of that book, and he is with us here on Under the Hood with Jonathan Hood. Scoop, my pleasure, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
No, anytime, man. It's always a pleasure when you and I get in the same space, man. So I'm always, let's, everybody else calls you J Hood, Hoodie, all this, that, and the other, man. You're hooding this, man. You on some greatness stuff. You already know. I've been giving you flowers for years. So I'm gonna keep like dumping flowers on you, but you're not in the grave, so we're good.
Yes, it's good to be on this side, by the way, on
Right,
this side
exactly,
of the
exactly,
grave.
exactly.
That's for sure. This is through Triumph Books, and we want you to check it out about George Gervin, why I was born to score. So tell me about George Gervin. Like to me, when I think of that name, when you were synonymous with this book, and the first thing I thought was great basketball personality, but still underrated. How
Yes,
true do you think that statement is in 2023?
I think it's well. Here's the thing. From my standpoint, I think it's true. Because of the way in which we discuss players in this era as being rings the end all be all to where the conversation starts. It's almost like we walk backwards. So, how many rings somebody has, whether that person has rings, this, that, and the other. We're having a conversation about individual greatness based on what a team actually does when it comes to basketball in these conversations. And because of that, I think somebody like George Gervin, who hasn't won any rings, gets reduced to a, a fourth or fifth tier of the conversation when he really, in my mind, should be much higher when we're talking about what somebody's ability to do when that person played the game of basketball, what contributions that person made to the game of basketball, and what that person's total career looked like while they played the game of basketball. So, yeah, I do think he's underrated. I think he's underappreciated to a certain degree, but George feels differently. George feels that history is always, always, always going to level itself to what it's supposed to be. And he says this in the book. He uses a phrase that you can't keep piling dirt on it because eventually that dirt is going to blow away. So basically, as much as you try to, excuse my language, shit on my career and dismiss it and unappreciate it, don't worry. Time will blow all of that dirt that you put on it away, and people will see what they need to see. And he brings up the point of how, in his mind, he's gotten the credence that he deserves through kids playing 2K now, and how 2K is based
Mm.
on numbers and efficiency. And him being one of the most efficient scorers that the game has ever seen has elevated him back into the conversation where he feels he deserves it. He doesn't feel the same lack of appreciation about his career that I do in this moment.
You and I in our conversations have not talked about the research that you do when you are able to take a project like this
Thank you.
book about George Gervin. What did you do to prepare for this book?
I read probably 15, 16 biographies, memoirs, and autobiographies just to get prepared for this book because I had never done as a writer. This was a new lane for me doing somebody's book, and the last thing you want to do is mess up somebody else's story. I remember Spike Lee talking about when he got the rights to finally do Malcolm X's story. He's like, okay, this one I can't fuck up, because this is not just a movie. This is about they're handing me the reins to tell somebody this great their life story. I cannot mess this up. So I kind of went through, not that it's the same thing that George is like, on some Malcolm X level. He's special, but that's another
Yes.
level of specialness, but I just knew I could not mess this up. So let me do what I need to do to get this right. So the initial research, when I agreed to, as George asked, could help tell my journey with me? In helping tell this journey, I wanted to make sure I was on point with rereading and sometimes reading some new stuff that I hadn't read and look at it in a different light and not read it from a place of enjoyment, from a place of, learning about somebody else's life, but look at it from one reader to another reader. Look at it from one writer to another writer to see what works, what doesn't work, how what type of pacing I can have, and why that pacing works in some books with some stories and doesn't work in other books with other stories. Word choices, how to break a good memoir up so that it reads not necessarily chronological, and people who already know that person's career can predict where it's going to be next, so that it doesn't read like a Wikipedia page or an encyclopedia page, where it's not anything that can be found something else. All that stuff went into the reading so I can know what I have to work with. So, reading Julius Erving's book over again, reading Howard Bryant's story, biography that he just did on Ricky Henderson, reading J.R. Moringer's both books on Phil Knight, but specifically on Andre Agassi, which is probably one of the most amazing, biographies, memoirs you're ever going to read. How he just his ability to craft stories and pay attention to Andre's insane recall on his life. Reading Mike Tyson's autobiography, reading Kevin Garnett's, which he wrote with David Ritz, who's probably one of the greatest autobiographies we have when it comes to Black musical culture. Just going through all of reading Hirschfield, reading Steve Martin's book, which was amazing. Like, what is the name of it? Born Standing Up. Steve Martin's autobiography, his memoir, is insane. It's insane, but it's totally different than anything else I'm reading. So it wasn't just sports stuff. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get a feel for everything. Hell, reading Malcolm X over again for probably the 40th time. But as Bunk said in The Wire, looking at it with soft eyes now.
Yeah.
All of that went to the initial research process of even starting to write this book and go on this journey with George Gervin so I could get myself right. I had to be right in my mind to be able to do this. And then the research afterwards, as you get information about his story, about his life, and going back and telling and finding ways that you can tell what he's already told you, give it more depth, make it more comprehensive, give it another dimension so that the story becomes fuller without getting boring. And keeping in mind that I'm talking to a man who's retelling a life of 70 years. So his recall is not going to be the same as Andre Agassi, who did his book at like 46. You know what I'm saying? He's lived more life. So there's things that he's going to tell that he's going to forget. So I go back and get those stories from other people and then bring it back to him so he can fill in the gaps. Yeah, well, I talked to this person and they said this. Yeah, well, that's right. But this what else happened after this? So all of that type of research. So yeah, all of that went into doing this, man.
Yeah, the book's entitled Ice, Why I Was Born to Score. It's right here on the right-hand corner, as available right now. The story of George Gervin, Scoop Jackson writing that book, and he talks about it here on Under the Hood with Jonathan Hood. So we use the word cool a lot, whether it's with a K or C. We use the word cool. I went back into all the magazines and all the stuff that you've written. I've never seen you have like a definitive list of cool. And I think that when I think of George Gervin, it's, to me, Scoop, it's not just what he did on the basketball floor, but also it transcends what he did on the basketball floor because he became an icon for so many people, from a commercial standpoint, salespersons, a pitchman. So where is he amongst the cool athletes that you've been around?
Well, I mean, he personifies what it is to be cool in the body of a Black man. And I say that to say we've always been given images of cool, and a lot of those images are caricatures of cool. Antonio Vargas, Max Julian, Richard Roundtree. We've been sold on what that type of cool is, but that's a caricature of cool.
The guy that was on the back of the Jet magazine. Whoever was in the back of the Jet magazine with the Newports or selling liquor, that was cool to me when I was growing up.
Exactly. Yeah. But look at the cast that we came up with, and I'm a little bit older than you, but the cast that came up when they were basically living those caricatures of being cool, the hustlers, the pimps, the street dudes doing their thing. They were cool. The coolest dude I ever met in my life, met in my life, even cooler than George Gervin, was a guy that I went to high school with, Darren Triplett.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. When you called his name, he never turned his neck. He turned his whole body around. Coolest motherfucker ever. Hood. I'm like, this dude.
Right.
I'm like, Trip is the coolest dude I've ever. In high school, he's like 3 years older than me. I think I'm a freshman. He's a senior. Or I'm a sophomore. I forgot. But I'm like, this is the coolest. And live that life. Voice was cool. Demeanor's cool. Girls loved him. He was that dude. But George was different because George wasn't a caricature. You know what I'm saying? He walked in every phase of his life that we got to see in the public eye as that embodiment of coolness of black men. Walt Frazier had that, but there was a certain Walt didn't talk cool the way George did. He didn't fit the slim, cool, facet that George did. Walt would do, furs and minks and Rolls Royces. That was an extravagant cool. George's cool was more approachable. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, he did his furs every now and then, but they weren't chinchillas. They were minks. Cats would spend money on minks back in the day. He wasn't driving around in a Rolls Royce. He had a Cadillac with a Rolls Royce front. We could all get with that because we could afford that. You know what I'm saying? He was wearing gaiters. And he was from Detroit. So Detroit is a different type of cool. Than Walt Frazier. No disrespect. Walt Frazier, country dude. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
He's from Atlanta. He's from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
He came here to East. He went to East. He Illinois dude. He ain't a Chicago dude. He the real city dude. He a down south cool. George Gervin is Detroit cool. That's different. You know what I'm saying? Julius Erving was a New York cool. A different type of cool. George never had to go an afro. He had a little hair, but everything he did was the embodiment of cool. And from your point that you made about the commercialization of cool, none of them commercialized cool the way George did, and George never did it purposefully. That was just his life. You know what I'm saying? That was just he just lived every interview he did, the way he talked, the way he carried himself. Julius Erving was so cool that you never thought that he was just happy. He was just cool. Walt Frazier was cool to the point that he personified cool in a way that there was a sense of seriousness to it. George was so cool, and Michael Cooper said it. He smiled when he played basketball. And that's how cool can you get when you score 40 on people and you're smiling doing it? You know what I'm saying? And you're not sweating scoring 40. And then when they take you off the court, everything you do is about cool. Every interview you do is cool. And then you team up with Nike, and of all the posters, signature posters that they're doing, the Truck Robinsons, the Paul Westfalls, the John McEnroes, they're doing all of these posters, DJ and Gus in Seattle. They're doing Dr. Duncanstein, and they're doing Norm Nixon on a bolt of lightning. They're doing all this stuff. When they do George Gervin, that ice, man, as I said, white boys had Farrah Fawcett on their wall. We had George Gervin on our wall. Right. That's as simple as it was. So as a black young man coming up in society, every day, and I don't know too many brothers who did not have that post on their wall. We woke up every day and saw what black cool was like. Every day we saw that. So George resonated with a level of coolness I don't think any athlete could ever match.
It's funny that we talk about this, Scoop, because I've done maybe 10, 12 radio shows with Reggie Theus on NBA radio. And I tell him that I'm a certain generation that you were on my wall next to Jesus and MLK. Right. And because Reggie Theus, before Mike, it was about him. Everybody wanted that dream of, a blonde and a brunette walking down Rush Street in a fur mink coat for just an average basketball team. But him and Walter is really what we had for me growing up in the 80s, right? And he replied to me, he goes, well, I had Farrah Fawcett on my wall, that Farrah Fawcett on my wall. And I said, you don't even understand how big you were in the city before Mike came here,
Yes.
because you were that guy. You had the perfect hair, and you look like that. You look like you just rolled out of a magazine, and you just always had this look. And everybody that was poor
And you
or
were prettier
black
than Farrah
or any,
Fawcett.
yeah,
You
yeah,
were
and
prettier
then
than Farrah Fawcett, right?
yeah,
Exactly.
and then he hit me, and he was like, you know what, I didn't even realize. And the reason why I set up to ask you this question is, does George understand his place, not just in basketball, but just as a sports figure, and in the way that he was able to go through his life? I mean, this book is one thing, but does he realize, how much he meant to so many people?
He didn't realize. He's kind of realized it over the course of the back end of his career, and people walking up to him and telling him stories about what he meant to them. But I don't think, and we talked about this during the book, and I think he mentions it somewhere in the back of the book, that he didn't really realize it until I presented it to him. You know what I'm saying? In the course of doing the book, I told him, like, look, you don't understand. And I started telling people that I've spoken to before I even did this book, and paying attention to what they said George Gervin meant to them that he hadn't had the privy of hearing. When we have these conversations of great basketball players when he's not in the room, talking to Chris Paul, and Chris Paul, but you don't understand how my father felt about George Gervin, and Chris Paul would tell George Gervin when he said, hey, man, no, my father loved you, but they don't go into detail because that's player thing. You know what I'm saying? But players will let their guard down with you because there's no protection. We just talking. We just talking hoops, and relying those stories to him, relying stories to people at Nike who work with him, talking to people who he did commercials with. Hell, talking to Kevin Durant, about what he means to them. And there's only so much certain men are gonna tell other men, but there's a wall that we don't have.
Especially black men.
Right, exactly. Especially, but black men that you want to look at you a certain way. You know what I'm saying? Now, we believe in giving flowers to each other, but there's still as an athlete, there's ways you want other athletes to basically look at you. And it's hard. Here's what I'm trying to get to, Jonathan, is that it's hard for someone to give respect when you're kissing their ass. And athletes want other athletes, especially former athletes, to respect them as, the same way. So the same way they look at them to a certain degree. So they're not going to give that same open armness because there's a fine line between giving somebody love and kissing their ass. And when you're trying to give respect for someone, like I said, it's hard to give respect for someone if they feel that, you're kissing their ass. So they don't share the same way. You and I, they don't care about us. You know what I'm saying? They're like, nah, you're the one kissing my ass. You know what I'm saying? We don't kiss. We can have these conversations. And they share with us the way they feel about things that they would never share with that individual. Mm-hmm. And doing this book, I was able to share with George over the course of me doing this for 30 years or whatever. Man, dude, this is how this dude feel about it. This how everybody I talked to from Detroit, and that's where it really broke down, to be honest with you. All these years that I've been doing this, man, I get into conversations with Detroit guys about which city is better, who had the best between Detroit and Chicago. Jonathan, you know this. This is an ongoing conversation.
Yep.
And when we get in this tit for tat, up until probably 2012, maybe 2010, 2012, Detroit would always win their argument because we could go tit for tat, player for player. You got Magic, we got Isaiah. You know what I'm saying? We go down to the low level. You got Curtis Jones, we got Billy Harris. We go down street level and do this. We can go anywhere you want to.
Right.
We can go. Let's go. You got Chris Webber, we got Mark Aguirre. Brother, we can go anywhere we want to. We can go for this.
Right.
They always threw out George Gervin, man. And that would end the argument. We never, ever, ever had that one player like, nah, we got nobody that can fuck with Ice. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I've had these conversations with people like us, but I've had many of these conversations with ball players from Detroit. Every one of the ball players from Detroit, I've had this conversation. We've argued back and forth about this. You know what I'm saying? Everybody. The only person I have not had this conversation with from Detroit is Antoine Joubert. Judge and I have not had this conversation. But down the line, We've always had it, and they always throw George because they know how special this dude is. So George Gervin knows nothing about these conversations. But when you tell him about it, like I've had these conversations with Spencer Haywood, I've had these conversations with Jalen Rose and Chris Webber, I've had these conversations with Derek Coleman, I've had these conversations with Steve Smith. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I've had these conversations with legendary Detroit cats, and you're the one that they throw out. It's like, no, y'all ain't got this. He doesn't know this. So he doesn't know until like we really got together, had these conversations, how he resonates and what he really means to people that mean something to him. You know, and add to the fact that he even says this in the book that he didn't realize not only how he resonated, but how important it was that he hold down that cool factor and what that really meant beyond just basketball. You know, he's like, I never tried to be cool. I just tried to be me. But how other people perceive that's what it is. He never knew how other people perceived his cool and what that meant to people, especially young black men. He never really knew until we got together to do this book.
Scoop, for a long time, and I think it's still this way somewhat, under Jerry Reinsdorf, you know, when a team was underachieving, they'd bring in attractions. On the White Sox side of things, one of my favorite players, Ken Griffey Jr., was here with the White Sox toward the end, or Kevin Youkilis, or players like that would just be here just for an attraction. On the Bulls side, they brought in George Gervin. I wonder, was there any conversation about George's travels? Because he was here, we got that coolness, that glimpse while he's here in Chicago, just for a cup of coffee. But I wonder his travel, San Antonio, Chicago, how much was that part of the book?
We talk about that, but we talk about it in the context of why he feels he never should have come to Chicago. Even though I feel differently because I'm looking at the entire basketball scope of his career. He's looking at his career specifically. You know, and I think it's important, and it gives to it anchors his significance in that he's the only player in basketball history to not only play with Jordan and Julius Erving, but he started his career playing with Julius Erving and ended his career playing with Michael Jordan. He's the only person that can say that. So, you know, in looking at basketball history, I think that anchors him. And he didn't look at it that way because he looked at it in the moment that he had to live with and why he actually got to Chicago and how he feels he never should have been here. And we go into depth about that in total detail in the book. And, you know, how that actually played a role of being the end of his career and how difficult it was for him when he got to that finish line. So we talked about that moment in those contexts, strictly from that, because, you know, it was a contract. It wasn't a contract dispute. They had a new coach in San Antonio, and he tried to convince George that he should come off the bench because he was older and he wanted to play a different style of basketball. Mm-hmm. And he goes to the point like, look, people forget the year before I came to the Bulls, I was still an all-star. You know what I'm saying? I'm 34 years old. I'm still playing the all-star games at 34 years old. I'm still getting it done. So we get a new coach and he's telling me, no, I want you to go to business. I'm like, no, I'm, you know, you're just coming to this franchise. I built this franchise, you know? So they're head buddy. And so he's like, I ain't got to deal with this. And he goes to ownership like, I want out. You know, and he's like, my ego's in the way because of the way this is going down and what I've built and all this, that, and the other. And I'm not liking this coach and I'm not liking this situation. I want it out. And he's like, he said, look, man, the ownership group tried to beg him not to leave San Antonio because they know what he meant. But he's like, I got my own way. You know, Ice got in the way of George Gervin is how he always puts it. You know, and he demanded trade to get to Chicago. And he regrets that just because he's still with the organization. You know, he's like, because they begged me not to do it, and I shouldn't have treated the organization like that. But once he got here, the downside for the way he looks at it, once he got here, he said, watching Michael Jordan play early on, just watching Michael. That second year, after that rookie year, watching him, just going to practice. He's like, my career's done. He's like, I'm still an all-star player in my mind, technically I am because I'm coming next season. I'll be it outside. He's like, there's no way. He knew it. He said that's a hard thing for when you're a top athlete to look at like, no, that's it. He literally said he watched Michael Jordan. He's like, no, that. This is a different. It's almost like the word we call people aliens. He's like, oh, I've seen it. This is it. I'm good. I'm done. So as much as we saw, like you say, him here to get a cup of coffee, you know what I'm saying? He's like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm only here to do this. I get this dude is like the greatest. He knew it then, so it was a hard thing for him to go through. And that time in his life became the bad period of his life. So he looks at it. He doesn't look at that Chicago thing with all of the fondness that you would think that goes with it, because it was him leaving San Antonio, him seeing the end of his career, and what wound up being the finish line, which we know from athletes, professional athletes, when you reach a certain level of greatness, that's the hardest thing they have to go through. You know what I'm saying? It's hard for them to end because their whole lives have gotten to this point.
You hit on something that I think we need to bring out more. And again, we're talking about the book Ice, Why I Was Born to Score, the story of George Gervin, of course, Scoop Jackson, a writer and researcher for this book. At any point in your conversation with George, did you ever felt like you were talking to Ice, or is Ice buried?
Ice
what you just laid out is two different people.
Yeah,
that's what you just did in that answer. Because Ice got in the way of his pride, but George is someone, it seems like, that you've sat down and written the book with. Is that true?
Yes, and that here, full disclosure, that's part of the reason there was a fight between us and the publishing company, specifically George, and the publishing company with the title of the book. He did not want the book to be called Ice. Didn't, because this is the story of his life, not just his basketball career. And he's like, this basketball is it's a central part to who I am, but that's not my entire life. And this book is my entire life story. And I don't want to be defined, and I'm never going to be defined. I'm not ever been defined by that. You know what I'm saying? And once you get into the story, you realize Ice is the one that became my biggest problem. Ice is the one that I was trying to live up to when I had my drug habit. Ice is the one that I was trying to be that person and that, caricature of being that person that was, everybody loved and was cool, and this, that, and the other, when I'm going through my own shit. I'm always trying to be Ice and always trying to be on. And Ice is the last person that I need to be. You know what I'm saying? I need to get back to George, and that's half the fight of his story. So Ice is not that person that we see. It's not an alter ego, but it's the person that was created by who he was through playing basketball, but not who he was through being a human being. So yes, there are two different people. And his fight for just naming that the cover was always a fight, because he's like, I don't want this to continue to define who I am. And he always wanted to, he said, if I ever did a book, I was going to call it that, because the way I look at my life is, in everything that I've achieved, I score. I barely had a high school education. You know what I'm saying? But I got through life without having that. And I'm able to, now they paying me to give speeches. I scored in that. I scored with my wife. I've been married to her for 50 something years. You know what I'm saying? I scored going through the drug situation and got over that when I wasn't myself. I scored in that. I scored raising my kids. I scored in that. I scored with the San Antonio Spurs. I left them for 1 year, but been with them my entire, I've been with the same organization basically for 50 something years. I scored in that. I scored in being with Nike. I went with Nike. I was Phil Knight's first signature athlete that he signed at this company. I was here when he was giving out shoes in the car. I'm still with Nike. I scored in that. You know what I'm saying? I scored in my friendships. My same friends, the same friends I went to high school. I got my same crew. I scored in that. He's looking at everything in life and how he scored. And of course, he's looking at how he scored in basketball, but that becomes a metaphor to his life. And in all of these walk through lives, all the things I just mentioned, everything I just mentioned to you, and why he looks at how he scores, that's George, not Ice. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That is George, not Ice. So there were times in the book when we had to relive certain things that happened on the basketball court where Ice did come out. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to call it the beautiful arrogance of Ice, because he has a beautiful arrogance because he knows he knows exactly how great he was and his contributions to this game. And that's why he goes to the front. Y'all can't put dirt on that. No, they ain't no, He goes through Nike headquarters, and there's no statue of him there. Of all the athletes Nike's had, and him being the first signature one, and all these meant to them, you know, they don't have a statue of him. They got buildings named after Mia Hamm and Jerry Rice. You know what I'm saying? They don't even have a statue of him. They got statues all across. You walking up and down this, like the Hollywood Walk of Fame of athletes, and they don't even have a statue there. And he's like, it doesn't bother him. He's like, cause I know. and that's when Ice will come out. You get what I'm saying? I know.
Yeah.
I know what Ice did. and he'll use it in that terms. He would go in the fourth person. No, I know what Ice did. You can't throw that dirt on Ice. The wind gonna blow that dirt. We know what Ice did. I don't need, what did Fife say? I don't need a statue to tell you how nice I am. It's the exact same thing that he walks through life with. I don't need that. I know what Ice did. I know who Ice is. I know what Ice did on that court. I know. So that's when Ice comes out. And he has to come out because he's like I said, it's a beautiful arrogance. There is humbleness there, but there's not a sense of insecurity when it comes to basketball. And that's when Ice, it's almost like, you're talking to Ice right now. I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna tell you right now. And I ended on this. The most beautiful story he gave me in the entire book, of all the hours we spent talking, man, was him being Ice and talking about how he would, in games, like he think he has maybe 3 technicals his whole career, right? Because he was so cool, because he's Ice on the court. You know what I'm saying? And he doesn't let anything bother him.
Right.
But he said the only thing, because I think it was maybe Hugh Evans that asked George Gervin to induct him into the Hall of Fame. And I'm like, that says a lot about a basketball player when a referee asked to, for a player to induct him, because you all got that. Y'all don't have those type of relationships. He said, no. He said, I had a beautiful relationship with referees because all I do during the game is I never talk shit to any of the players. I would talk to the referees. I'd be like, oh, ref, get him off me. Pow. Go to the whole finger. Ref, get him off me. Pow. You know what I'm saying? And wow. I'm listening to him tell these stories. I'm like, that's Ice. That's that beautiful arrogance. And when he's telling the story, in the back of my mind, I'm reminded of what Michael Cooper said about he always smiled. He was so cool, he smiled when he played. So imagine this dude dropping 40, winning scoring titles. He won 4 of them, talking shit while smiling, but not even talking to the players, talking to the ref. He's so cool doing it. And him retelling the stories, you're like, dude, it's easily some of the most arrogant shit you're ever going to hear, but it's so beautiful hearing it from him. You know what I'm saying? And when he, get him off me, ref, get him off me. And one, ref, make the call. It's about to make the call. You're like, that's Ice. That's when Ice comes out in that type of situation. And it came out throughout the course of telling this book. Doing this book. He came out every now and then. So I'm like, I'm talking to Ice right now.
Ice, Why I Was Born to Score, available right now wherever you get your books. Scoop, I'm glad we spent some time, man, talking about this. This story is interesting to me. As we just broke it down, I think we've told people different ways or different reasons to be able to check this out, because I want to know about George, but I'm going to know a lot about Ice as well. We saw him from afar, the once a week that he'd possibly be on national TV for the game of the week, but at least we'll be able to really delve into who he is, and I'm looking forward to turning those pages.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. There are 3 games we highlight in here, and I go through and say, well, I just talk about games, and I think that's 3 or 4 games. If you really want to know about his basketball career, you read that section about games, because we go into detail about certain games that were basic statement moments in his career. And then, to me, once you get through with the games, go to the part about how he's contributed to society and how much more he's done off the basketball court than what he's done on. And that's where that beautiful arrogance really shows you what a beautiful person that he really is, and that, you know, he has the largest charter school system in the state of Texas. And all these athletes now getting schools and opening schools. David Robinson, Jalen Rose, all these Deion Sanders, all these academies that have been popping up. He was the first one to do it. So not only has he set the standard in certain things that go through basketball and through sport, he, from an educational standpoint, there's no other athlete in the history of any sport who has done what he's done educationally and set that foundation. And those are the stories where you're like, damn, you know, the depth and the layers of who this guy is, a human being, are fascinating to me. And he shares it all in the book. I'm not gonna say it's an amazing read because I wrote it. It's just an amazing story. You know what I'm saying? It's an amazing life story, and you learn more about life than you do about his life. So,
the iconic Scoop Jackson with us here on Under the Hood. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
man, much love. Always, always. Let's catch up. I think I owe you what? Dinner, drinks, a lawn mowing service. Well, I'll owe you a bunch of stuff, right?
8 or 9, but who's counting? Just me. I'm the one counting. Me.
All right. While you're not counting, let me know when I get to double digits. Then we good.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right, man. Much love, baby. Appreciate it.